General notes on the National Strength and Conditioning Association recommendation. So there is a document from National Strength and Conditioning. It's on Blackboard UTC Learn. Uh, a lot of the stuff that you see, as I mentioned, is it's pretty much the same when you look at the different organizations. So uh, there's some small tweaks. This is kind of addressing some of those small tweaks. Uh, uh, that I put together. So, uh, classify participants. I'll just mention this: beginner, intermediate. Intermediate is somebody that's been doing the basic routine for a while. Advanced is somebody that's really doing more than the basic routine. So, if you're participating in resistance exercise and you like it, and you do it on a regular basis, that would be you'd be advanced. Even though you might not be a strength athlete or anything like that. Uh, Sequencing the training, periodization, what is it? How does it vary from participant to participant? I talked about this before. Exercise selection. Uh, they're, they do a lot with regression and progression. I think that's really great. Uh, it has extensive information concerning advanced and remedial exercises, and that kind of gives you an idea of how do you make this exercise more difficult? How do you make it easier? And depending on who you're working with, you'd make those adjustments accordingly. So for one individual, you might do a push up against the wall. For another individual, you might be doing, if you take that as the extreme of the low end, then you look at the average, you're doing the push up, working your way down, and then you could go all the way to the extreme of doing one arm push ups. So anything in between is fine, and you've got to figure out how do I progress them to more difficult movements if that's what you're trying to reach, if that's what your goals are, and or how do we remediate it and make it easier if if that's what's needed for the individuals. Advanced movements have an increased neurocognitive component, so some people never really get to the advanced movement. Uh, they incorporate levels of core stability and flexibility. Back in the day, I could do one arm push ups. Can't do them anymore. But I didn't even think I was doing them right because they weren't that hard. And really, what was going on was I did a lot of dumbbell exercises, dumbbell presses back in the day, and the stabilizing muscles associated with my shoulder and my flexibility of my shoulder were very good. So for me to do that type of exercise was easy. Now it's not going to happen. So the levels of core stability and flexibility are definitely going to play a role. And if that's your goal to be able to do that, you can work towards that and do exercises specifically to try to improve and enhance that. In other instances, like now, it'd be nice if I could do a one arm push up, but I don't really care, and it's not going to affect my ability to complete tasks of daily living. So, it's not as big of a deal. But that's what you have with the advanced movements. Figure out where you are or your subject are at, and then complete the appropriate movement. Program design, methods and descriptions. Some of the things, especially here, are advanced concepts to increase overload. So you do a basic routine, the beginner intermediate routine, and after a while, you're not really sore anymore. You're not seeing any improvements. Uh, you're kind of plateaued and you just kind of stay there. So how can you make it more difficult? In the ACSM document as well, uh, they talk about overload, and they talk about this not in that one page summary, but in other areas. And it's different ways to really stress the muscle and to overload the muscle. Not something you do with the beginner, but if you're at the advanced level and you're plateaued and you want to see continued improvements, these are things that you can do to kind of try to see those improvements. So single set versus multi-set, complex lifts, so strength exercise followed by a power exercise, compound lifts, 2 or 3 exercises for a similar muscle group, circuit training. Again, that's where you're taking hardly any rest from one set to the next. Superset, alternate exercises for different muscle groups. Pyramiding, increasing and then decreasing the training load. Drop sets, you start high and then you decrease the weight. Some of these things they've been around for a while. They're fine and they work. You could probably think of other ways that you can overload the muscle. You need to be careful that you don't create too much damage or damage to your orthopedic structure, so damaging your joints. But otherwise, to do a level of overload and to do things that are a little more extreme, a little bit more hardcore within reason, will help improve. You will see improvements in strength and size and whatever by doing that. Heavy negatives. I always love this one. Eccentric exercise with greater than your 1 rep max that you can lift. Sounds a bit scary. I never did that. But if you're in a certain situation where that's appropriate, some of the strength equipment that we had, it had hydraulic weight systems, so you were able to create more force and more pressure, so that you were able to have more force than the 1 rep max that you could potentially lift. So you could do the eccentric aspect of the exercise, and once you got to the bottom, you released the pressure, and then the force went away. So you didn't have that danger of killing yourself, because you can squat 225 and now you've put 275 and you're going to go down, but you're never going to come back up. It's difficult to do that in a safe manner. This would be with the hydraulic and piston and pressure systems. That's a way that you can get that done. Forced reps, spotter provides resistance. So especially you kind of couple some of these together. You do some complex sets, and then after that you have or cluster sets, multiple sets with short reps. You decrease the weight and you get to a point where you can barely lift the bar, and then the spotter can provide some resistance. Some of these things are fun to do. It's just a way to kind of change things up. Accommodating resistance, adding chains or bands to the weight. So if you add a chain or a band, then especially a chain, as you get to the bottom, as you finish the movement, depending on what movement you've done, the weight is going to be less, and as you get more away from the floor, the resistance is going to be more. You could do that with bands. You could do that with chains. It's a different way of doing things. Is it better than other ways? Not necessarily. If you like it, great. If you don't have to do it. If you don't have the ability to do that at your facility, that's fine. You have partial range of motion. This would be the old school 21s, where you would do the first 7 reps down to the midpoint. Then the next 7 reps would be from the bottom coming up, and then you do 7 full range of motion repetitions. And you can really do that with a lot of different exercises. In the past, I don't know what people are doing now, but in the past, people did that for biceps, and they didn't really do it for anything else. And there's no real reason for that. You could do that with a bunch of different exercises if that's kind of the way you want to do things. One thing that I would do that's not in any of this is I would do an exercise and I would pause halfway through. So that way you're counteracting gravity and you're counteracting the momentum, and you have to have a level of control to stop that weight at that point. And I bring it, complete the movement, stop at the midpoint when I was at the end of the concentric phase. I'd then start doing the eccentric phase, lift the weight halfway, stop it, and then finish the repetition. It's fine. You don't see that in the research literature, but doing things like that you look at the physiology, you look at the mechanisms, they make sense. If it's something you want to do, great. If you don't want to do it, that's fine too. But all these things are more advanced. If you do them in a beginner, you increase the risk of muscles tearing at the cellular level, so you increase delayed onset muscle soreness. And if your participant has a lot of delayed onset muscle soreness, then they're probably going to quit. So this is really for the person that's advanced. Phases of training. This was talked about in the other article. Muscular endurance, hypertrophy, and strength. In that article, look at the appropriate charts. Endurance, lighter resistance, shorter rest. If you're looking at the exact recommendations, follow that ACSM position stand. But this is addressing that. Nutrition. I think I've talked about that before as well. Look at your scope of practice. The ACSM provides a position stand on nutrition. Stay away from specifics. So just give basic recommendations. Make sure that your recommendations are in line with whatever nutrition, whatever their dietitian is telling them. If they're seeing a dietitian, telling them to get more fruits and vegetables is fine. Telling them to eat, they need to eat fewer calories if they're trying to lose weight is fine. But once you get into the specifics of how many, what types of nutrients and they're not getting enough of this vitamin, they're getting too much of that vitamin, that sort of stuff, what sort of supplements they should take, you stay out of that business. Core training, they're looking at the whole body. You're looking at certain areas, and then upper extremity and lower extremity, and anything that helps stabilize a joint structure and generates initial central force instead of force at the end or the periphery of the movement. So anything that's associated with muscles that are more internal and more centrally located, that's what we're talking about, the core. So if you're looking at your shoulder stabilizing muscles, that would be the core as well. The muscles associated with your back, your abdomen, your hips, all of that's associated with the core. So when I was growing up and doing a lot of my strength training in the late 80s, early 90s, when we talked about abs, and that's all we did, and that's not really working the core. And when you develop your exercise prescription and you talk about core training, don't say abs. That you work your abdominal muscles during your core training, it's fine, but you have a lot more core muscles than just your abs. So do not use the term abs. That's not appropriate. That's what I did. I worked my abs. I did a ton of crunches and those types of exercises, sit-ups. But there's a lot of core muscles that I wasn't really getting in shape. The core muscles associated with my hip, I don't know if I did anything for that. I probably did it to a certain extent when I did squats. The core muscles associated with my back, I really didn't do anything to improve those for the most part. So I never did a plank until graduate school, and really probably when I was teaching at UTC. So a lot of those types of core muscles, if you just say abs, you're not talking about a lot of other muscles that really should be incorporated when you talk about core. And with core, you have the anterior, so in the front, the lateral, the side to side, the posterior, anti-rotational and rotational core. The anti-rotational, the functional movement screen folks talk about that. And when we do the functional movement screen in lab, we'll talk more about that. When you do resistance exercise, what it really helps the most is your posterior core. That's what it really addresses the most. The anterior core, lateral, the resistance exercise doesn't really address that, and there's other exercises that will help with that. Rotational core and anti-rotational core, when you do sport, especially when you look at most exercise, it all begins from the hips and rotating the hips. So you have the issue of rotating the hips, but then you also have the anti-rotational to make sure that things don't go out of alignment and things don't get torqued at a higher speed than what your body can handle. So when you look at Tiger Woods, I wouldn't call him poor Tiger Woods because he made a ton of money. But if you look at his golfing career, I would say poor Tiger Woods. And he was able to generate a lot of speed through his hips and a lot of force through his hips and his body. His rotational core was extremely strong, and that's why he could hit the ball a mile. But apparently his anti-rotational core, not so much. And he's had all sorts of injuries, and he hasn't been able to get back to the level that he was performing at. He's not been able to get back there, and that's where the anti-rotational core that would help prevent some of those injuries that, or at least on a theoretical basis, that would have occurred. So you want these things to be in balance. You don't want one to be a whole lot stronger than the other. And it looks like that's, no, here we go. Core connection. The upper and lower body core exercises making them work together. Multi-joint. This is why the multi-joint exercises are recommended, because that's going to work the core a lot more, and especially the posterior core. Progression. The progression models are attached. I'm not going to ask any specific questions on that, and that's it.